Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants joining us from various regions. Welcome to yet another episode of Virtuoso Mastery Enablement webinar series, where we have with us Uzo Okpala, who is the team lead for the customer enablement department, and he'll be driving this session today on data-driven testing with Virtuoso. And with that, I would like to thank all the participants for joining us today and stay tuned for more updates. So Uzo, if you move to the next slide, let me cover the agenda for the day. So Uzo would be walking us through the introduction of Virtuoso, which is a SaaS test automation tool, which is powered by AI using AI ML capabilities and which also supports NLP test authoring. Then Uzo would be speaking about how we can create test data within Virtuoso to uh, initiate the data-driven testing approach. Then he'll be walking us through how the test data can be assigned with the journeys that we create in Virtuoso, which are called as test cases. And he'll also cover how to create the data-driven journeys and how to execute them. And towards the end, he'll also speak about how you can execute your test based on environment-specific information, targeting the same journey on multiple or executing the same journey on multiple environments with different set of test data. So thanks again for joining us today. With that, I would like to hand it over to our speaker, Uzo. And with that, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Abhijit, and hello everyone. Good day to you all. Thanks for joining us. So just like Abhijit said, I'll be taking us through a number of functions, particularly in the test data aspect of Virtuoso and how that plays an important part in creating our automated journeys and running them as well. But for the benefit of some of us that might be new to the platform or seeing it for the first time or having this experience for the first time, I think some things are worth mentioning and perhaps showing as well in terms of how the platform sits. As Abhijit said, one thing we pride ourselves on is the fact that it's a platform that is low code, requirement for building out your journeys or tests. And one of the key aspects of this is also the fact that when you do build out these journeys, there's hardly any maintenance to do compared to a number of other platforms when it comes to maintaining your selectors for element interaction. And that's where our self-healing feature comes in to manage those aspects for you. AI is now pretty much a part and parcel of our world today in so many walks, and in a similar fashion for us at Virtuoso, we've embedded that to take care of a variety of functions, which we'll cover in different webinar sessions. But for today, I'll show you the aspect of the AI and how it feeds into data generation and management. Again, the big part of this is how all this hangs together in allowing us to achieve complete automation of our end-to-end scenarios and even running it against a variety of configurations. So we're referring to devices and browser configurations here. So first things first is how this works. How does Virtuoso do its thing? How does anyone get onto the platform and get automating? Now, the main requirement is an understanding of the English language, because all the commands that we've generated for the platform or designed for the platform rely on that. And typically you might be wondering, well, where do I get an idea of what these commands are? How do I get started? And we have a very exhaustive user guide that provides this information for you. So by having that on your side panel, which I will show you very shortly, you're able to immediately access any command for performing any of the interactions that you wish to see. And in that way, just allows you this singular experience on a single point or screen where you're just able to have access to your user guide, have access to the test step editor, and build out your journey at speed. So creating test data, how do we go about doing this? So there's a few ways this happens within Virtuoso. So we have the manual creation process. We also have the process to allow you import pre-existing data, so CSV files, Excel files, etc., things like that. As we mentioned earlier, There's the AI generation aspect where we can utilize the AI embedded within Virtuoso to generate a variety of data that we need. And something we call our extensions library, where maybe for more advanced users or utilizing the AI to support the generation of such extensions, we're able to build JavaScript code that can perform even more complex or bespoke specific data generation requirements or other kind of interactions for our end-to-end automation. So what I will do is take us over to Virtuoso platform to show us how this actually works in principle, the concept of the manual data creation, importing data if we do require to, or utilizing AI. So bear with me whilst I flick screen across. There we go. So this is the Virtuoso dashboard, and we've created a project for today for the data-driven demonstration. So first thing I did mention on the call is just how easy it is to go about doing the step generation for Virtuoso. So this is our journey editor here. If we enable the live authoring, what this does is basically give us a live preview of the application on the test and allows us to validate steps as we go through. So if I toggle on that panel and run the live authoring process, I've pre-generated some early steps just to give you an idea of that how this runs through. And all we're aiming to do here is close the banner and the widget over here. Next thing I would like to cover as part of this demonstration is also tie this into how we can feed data in. So if we want to go through the process of, say, jumping onto the Virtuoso website and we're trying to get ourselves booked in for a demo, maybe complete a form, the process is fairly straightforward. So I'm just going to add a checkpoint here, and our checkpoints represent logical order of structure in our test. These can represent either minor tests or smaller tests within an overall end-to-end process, or simply us trying to aggregate or segregate our journeys to represent different points or interactions within the application. So as you can see, the first one, I've shown us the navigation process. Second point here, the cookie banner removal. And the third point will be our get started checkpoint. And then here, I can start to build out the natural language commands for making those interactions. Now, if you remember, we said earlier, we have documentation for supporting this process, easily accessible by clicking on the help and documentation guide on the top right of the screen over here, where you have the question mark. So by clicking on that, you have access to the guide, and then you can click on the search button and type in natural language. And once you select natural language syntax, you'd have access to all the commands that you can perform with Virtuoso. They're all hyperlinked, so by clicking on any one, it gives you an idea of what those commands mean and how to represent them in terms of writing it out within your step editor. So returning over here, first thing we're going to do is try to complete the form for booking in a demo with Virtuoso. So I'm just going to say look for get started. Performs that, and then click get started. Now that returns us to the form over here. And this just leads to the example of the first concept. How do we get data into Virtuoso to drive our journeys? So we have this scenario here. We've got this form with all these fields, and we might be thinking, how do I go about my data prep? So if I open up my data table on a new tab, I can go over here now and decide to manually create one. This is one of the ways. So I can say new data table, provide a table a name, and say user details, for example, and then create. And then in here, we provide the column headers, which will represent our variable names within the journey. So here I can say, for instance, first name. Maybe over here, give another for last name. Maybe something for the company name, etc. And then we start to populate this information in here and say, you know, like Steve Haynes, for example, and say ABC. And in this fashion, you can continue to populate each row as you need and then save the changes. And then once you save those changes, you're pretty much ready to now attach this to the journey. But before even doing that, what I want to show you is also the process of how we can do this in an import fashion if we already have pre-existing data. So I'm just going to delete this table, go about creating a new one, browse, and then I can pull in a pre-existing table, say create, give it a name, user details again. And here you go. This is just an external spreadsheet where I'd already pre-populated some of these details. So if this were a requirement as part of your end-to-end testing to test specific data being driven through your system, you can also achieve it in this way by pulling it through that CSV file. In a similar fashion, our AI capability allows this, where we can say, click on the AI button here, again, provide a table with a name. Let's call this random table. And then you provide a description over here. So this could be create a table with first name, last name, country, and phone number as an example. And then once we send this through, system processes the request we've put through, generates a preview for us to say, here's a bunch of first, last name, countries, and phone numbers. If we're happy with that, we can go ahead to create this table. And then we also have that straight away ready to use in our journeys. So that's just how straightforward and simple it is to go about creating data that we require for our journeys. And then now the next question on your minds might be, how do we go about linking this in? So what you would want to do is utilize the journey options menu over here, manage test data, and then we can assign the table that we need. So I'm just going to use the user details one that we imported. And you can see over here, we've got all the fields as we saw on the table available over here. And then once we save that, that's plugged and ready to go. Now, typically, a good way or indicator to know whether or not your table is successfully associated with the journey is if the indicator on the left here turns green. So as you can see, these ones here are gray and that one's green. So we've just created the association for user details. And if I refresh my page, there we have it. It's turned green, which means it's associated, and you can mouse over that to get a little tooltip to give you that pointer, or you can click on the Assign tab over here, and that will give you an indicator as well where it is. You can manage your details from here if you do wish to make any changes to any of the column headers that you need for your journey. So now returning back over here, we can go about now completing this information that we need based on the variables that we're going to drive. So first thing I'm going to do is add in those steps. Now, what you might notice is the steps might fail because I might need to refresh the page if it's not cached it in yet. So that might fail, and that's absolutely fine. We'll just refresh the page and rerun this, and we should be able to see it successfully run and complete the fields. So let's go ahead and create this. An important thing to note, part of best practices, is ensure that your column headers or your variable names are identical to what you use within your journey, because we've only created the association between the table and the journey, but we're yet to create the steps that will populate these fields. So I'll just go about doing that now. So first thing is write, what do we have? We've got first name, last name, all lowercase. Oops, sorry, that's on this one. First name, camel case, surname, company, phone number. Right. So we're just going to go here, right, $ first name in target field is first name. Next one we'd want to do is write $ surname in field surname. And maybe want to do similar for company, write $ company in company. And maybe finally, phone number. Let's write, I believe I called it that. Phone number, it's one word, right? $ phone number in field, your phone number. Oops. your phone number. And there we have it. So like I said earlier, you might notice a failure. That's because probably my page hasn't cached yet. So I'm just going to refresh this and then run this from the beginning. And we should get all of that, pick up the data that we need from our test data table, insert that into the fields. And in this way, we've saved ourselves a lot of hassle in terms of having to oops, bear with me a second, fix the step. There we go. Yeah, so that there happened because the form lives on an iframe, so I'd forgotten to switch the iframe. So I guess that's a little pointer for how Virtuoso can help you also recover from errors. So by literally using the fix step button over there, click on the area you intend for it to perform the interaction. It'll perform its scan and adjust things where needed. So as you notice, switch frame wasn't there previously. It's added that step in for us, all good. And it's driven the rest of the journey that way. So this is one of the ways where we can draw, or this is just how we can associate data tables with a journey, whether it's generated from AI, whether it's manually created, whether it's been imported via a CSV file. We're not limited to those data creation capabilities. We could also use the extensions aspect. So if you remember earlier, we mentioned about using extensions, which allows us import JavaScript code to perform a variety of actions. So for today's session, I'll be showing you how that can work with the extension that I have in place. So on the extension side, I'll just expand our panel. We've got this here, which is a random data generator, which is from the Faker.js library. And all that does is literally generate random fake data. For any information or ideas around how some of these extensions that we have within our library work, again, we've got that information within our guide. So if I were to look for generate random, there you go. It takes you there. It shows you or gives you details about what that extension does. And as always, examples of how you can write that within your Virtuoso journey. So if, for example, these were things you wanted to do, you can literally copy the information over there. So let me just copy those. Go back to the journey, and let's call this fake data gen. And I can paste those in here. There you go. And you can see that there, it's literally run a lot of those and returned all the values within the variable I've specified. And you can confirm this by simply clicking on the steps. Look in our side effects menu or panel, and that shows you a couple of things. The extension, so the code that's performing that action, and then what it's returned. So we've seen here, we wanted a full name, which is a first and last name. You can see that combination there, Haven Skiles or Skills. And over here, we've split it up. We can go for like just first name or the city, Lake Rosamond, etc. And you get the logic over there, how this works. So you can create a vast amount of data of various kinds and drive that again through your journey. So in these cases where we've used first name or surname, company name, phone numbers, etc., if I had a use case of, well, we do not want to use data that we've saved up for running valid tests against valid data in our system. We just want one-off data to check against our system, make sure some of these fields work as intended. This is another way to achieve that without, again, having to go through the process of manually maybe creating a table or maybe hard coding stuff like saying, write James in field first name and so on and so forth. This would be a more dynamic way, because what that means is each time you run your test. So if I ran this again, a bunch of new data is generated across these test steps over here. So we would hopefully see a change from all we saw for first name, last name, or city to something completely different. And that way, it avoids the potential blocker that's often the case with some systems where if data is run through one time, it might be blacklisted and preventing a second use, or maybe you just don't want to clutter your backend with duplicate data and want to keep things nice and clean to make it reusable if you do need to. So if we have a look over here again, you can see that's changed from Haven Skiles to Julio Cronin. and so on and so forth. That continues to make the changes for you. So this is how we can create data within Virtuoso using a variety of techniques or capabilities. As I said, it's not limited to these. For the scope of today's call, we won't be going into things like making backend calls with an API endpoint to pull data, because that's also another capability that we have within the platform where we're able to talk to things. It returns that information in a similar fashion like this in a variable with all the data dumped from that call. And again, you can drive that into your journey using whatever values have been returned. So this just ensures robustness in your test, as we said earlier, and just takes away that pain of having to return to manually maintain, update, or change anything in here, and makes your tests highly reusable. So that's the aspect of how data generation works within Virtuoso. So just returning to our slide deck, we've covered the manual creation, the process of importing AI generation, and also the extensions library within Virtuoso. We've also talked about how the test data can be assigned within the platform purely from the test data table aspect of things. And just to remind us again, some of the key things that we constantly drive home, best practices and some of the considerations you have to make when you're doing this. So again, column headers, we need to make sure that the way they're written in our table is identical to what we have within our journeys. We need to also make sure that each time we make changes to the tables, or modifications or anything of that nature, again, we save them. I mean, often it's one of those things we would think, yeah, it's common sense, but we've seen this happen a lot where users tend to forget, and then failures are occurring, but not because the journey is bad, but that link hasn't been established successfully by saving the table after completion. And then again, ensuring that the journey in question that you're automating or building is linked to the appropriate data table. So the relationship between the data tables and our journeys is one data table can be associated to many journeys. And that's how it hangs from an architectural standpoint. Okay, so creating data-driven journeys. I've kind of already segued into this earlier by touching into how test steps can be created. So we looked at the natural language processing aspect of things, how we can hard code stuff, but also for the sake of reusability, and just like you can see from the screenshot over here, by utilizing variables, most of our efforts for some of these tests that we aim to reuse as part of a regression or as part of a release cycle run, we'll just be updating our data if needed. But typically what tends to happen is either, like I said, the data is dynamically generated utilizing the Faker extension, or API endpoint calls are made to pull down certain data that we need to drive through our journey. Or alternatively, if we have spreadsheets that maybe process owners or external departments or other departments from the QA department create but need to validate within the systems made, we can again import all of those and then just make sure that we parameterize our journeys by utilizing variables as shown over here. And in terms of that, there's a number of things that we can also do with the data-driven aspect of Virtuoso. So it doesn't just serve things like user details and credentials and that sort of information. We can also perform actions against certain things on the application. So for instance, we can data drive clickable actions. We can data drive things like picking items from a list. We can data drive assertions. And pretty much a lot of the interactions that we make on the platform, we can data drive a large number of them. And that just, again, enables or enhances the concept of reusability of the test that we create across multiple journeys. So what I'm just going to do at the moment is take us through another journey that I've created and how some of this works. So bear with me, I'm just going to share the screen again. So back here to our Virtuoso platform, I'm returning to the dashboard over here. what I want to do in this case now is take us through this data-driven journey and show you what actually happens when we execute an actual data-driven journey. Because so far, all you've seen is a live authoring representation showing you the process of creating, editing, and assigning. But what does it look like when we actually run this with the hope of getting a result that we can review and share with whoever that we need to, that might be privy to that information or necessary to it. So over here, just to make you aware, I've already pre-created the table for this. So this will be run against the Apple website. And the journey that we're going to try and simulate here is trying to configure an iPhone 15. So in here, I've just put in some requirements that I need to validate this process. Again, this is unlimited. You can expand on this, but for the sake of time and the demo, this is what we thought would be worth sharing with you today. So I've got in here screen sizes, color, and the storage size as well. One of the typical questions we get is, oh, but what if I want to run a 6.1-inch display against maybe 256 storage or 512 or 1 gig, etc. Easy way to achieve that, if you wanted to make that sort of combination in terms of the iterations of your tests, will be literally copying that over there, pasting it in here, and then pasting with whichever color combination you want. Maybe you want it this time running in black titanium, and then maybe you want it running against, for instance, 512 or 256 or whichever combination. So you can list the display size n number of times as you require on the first column screen size, and then list the combinations that you want to test it against, and then repeat a similar thing for whichever other display size, color, and storage combination that you need. And that way you achieve that robust coverage of your test, because when we come to the point of running it, which you will see in a moment, the way Virtuoso takes it is each row on this table represents a test run and a test and a combination of these values that we want to run against. So returning to our journey where this is linked, I'm just going to set this to run so you can see how this runs in its typical state. There we go. So on the iPhone website, by default, when we are editing our journeys in Virtuoso and we've created these associations with like data tables and the values within them, what tends to happen is it will always pick the value on the first row when you're editing that journey, just to make sure everything works and everything hangs tight as you expect it. Now we've validated that our journey works and we've just performed what we need in terms of configuration up to the point of trading. I won't complete the process because I don't think management will be happy if I check out which 1239 for the sake of this. But now to run this journey on with the rest of the data that we have here. Oh, first things first, save the change. We just need to use the advanced execution menu over here. We now need to toggle our test data option, toggle that on, enable. And you can see here, we've got all the rows that we require to run. Now, if I execute this, what will now happen is on our project activity, we would have that. A job detail showing 3 rows, or sorry, 3 journeys running in parallel, which represent the 3 rows of data that we saw from our test data table. And once this completes, we can then review our test report and just see how did things perform, how did our test do. So there we go. We've got our review that 3 tests, 3 tests passed successfully. And a nice and simple way to have a look at what happened is by clicking on the steps with the variables. And we can look at the side effects here. This will say, hey, you asked me to pick 6.1-inch display for this particular run. And we can look at the screenshot here, use the before element interaction, and we can see it is asserted for the presence of the 6.1-inch display. We have that there successfully done. And now for the next step, in a similar fashion, we've said click on that screen size. Again, you can use the screen and the side effects to make sure it's done what you wanted. We still have that 6.1. We have that interaction, and it's clicked on that. We can see the blue border across the iPhone. Similar way, we perform same action for the color selection. So for those that might be wondering, why don't we just go straight ahead and click on color? Why is he doing the look for element color? Two parts to this. First part is making sure that part of the application that we're testing exists in the first place, so performing assertions to validate presence. And then the second thing, which plays a big part in how Virtuoso interactions happen, is we're pulling the context of the bots exploring the page to the specific area that we're interested in. So we've asserted this area called look for elements finish, pick your favorite. It's found it, and then we want to look for the color selection or options in this section, and it finds it. And the purpose of that is you can have web pages that might have, say, for instance, color dotted about in various places on the page, or things like login buttons or add to carts. If you imagine a product listing page, you can have all that information, but you're interested in a specific item on that page as opposed to any add to cart. And by pulling the context to the area using an assertion like this, it pulls it to the area, you perform the key interaction you want, which is here, looking for that color, which is, in this case, natural titanium. And we can see there, it's hovered over this one over here. That's what we're interested in. Now we go to the next step, which is click on color. It's click there. And we can see the blue border saying, right, he's selected, or we've selected what we intend to. And in a similar fashion, we've performed the same set of actions for the storage, pull the context to the area of the page that we're interested in using the assertion, assert for the presence of the particular storage we're interested in this case, 128, and then select that particular storage by clicking on it. Again, we can see that over there. And we proceed with the remainder of the test, which is trying to trade in and apply any insurance or care packages that we need before completing the checkout process. For the benefit of some of us on the call that may not have been present for previous sessions where we may have touched on things like self-healing, because if you remember at the very start of the call, when we're introducing how Virtuoso does this thing and how it enables the user to be more lean and efficient in their testing, self-healing, which is this band-aid or plaster icon you see on the right, is what it does to maintain the elements. So when this test was built out, I hadn't put in any selectors whatsoever. So no XPaths, no CSS, no IDs, no element structure, nothing. I literally put in the text that I saw on the UI in there, and it's now healed that particular element that I specified, saying, right, this is what you wanted. This is what I found and associated with that element. So this element here called finish, pick your favorite, has these selectors, and these are the code changes that I've made for that. And what this now does, because the way Virtuoso performs this thing and does the actual maintenance is by relying on the hint you provided. So when it establishes and makes these connections and you validate that you're happy with it, which is done by either selecting the green button here, which says this looks good to me, or the red button here, which says, no, that's wrong, don't do it. If you ignore it, it will presume you're happy with the selection. And the next time you run the journey, it retains that selection that it made and what it found. So back to how this does the maintenance is, if, for instance, this were to change XPath ID or CSS or whatever it might be tomorrow, when you run the journey, Virtuoso will ignore the hint because it's now gotten the confidence that, hey, I've got selectors the last time, I've healed that element, everything works, I'm going to run with the selectors. If it goes through that list of selectors that it has and it finds, hang on, I cannot find this element anymore using these selectors, it returns to the hint, which is why it's a very important part of the journey creation process, that and why we structure it that way, that naturally you just type in the hint what you see on the UI. So it returns to the hint that you provide, and then it starts to perform the page scan again to try and build out associations with that hint and the selectors, and then it does a similar thing like you see here. It will present a change, so if it does find a change, it will say, hey, these ones were broken, these are the ones I found, I'm going to create the association. Are you happy or not with that? And that's how it will do that job for you. So yeah, that's just a little explanation on what the self-healing aspect of Virtuoso is. Back to the data side, if we have a look here, we've selected iPhone 15 Pro. We can see iterations of our data rows paginated with these buttons over here. So if we go to number 2, for number 1 here, we can see we've gone for 6.1 inch. If we go to number 2, It's going for 6.7, which is what we specified in our data table. And the same thing happens for the color combinations. Here we've gone with black titanium. You can see it's hovering over there. It's done that. And in this way, what that means is rather than having to create multiple versions of your automated tests or journeys to test against the different color combinations or different size combinations, you can build one journey, parameterize it, as you can see here, utilizing variables within our table, set the values that we need within the table, and then using our advanced execution menu, we can then target whichever row of data that we're interested in. So this doesn't just run the whole lot. If you want to select specific rows, you can say, hey, I want you to run just this one. Once you hit the execute button, again, it will run that test with that specific combination. Because if you imagine a scenario where you have a release and maybe Apple have launched, I don't know, 3 terabytes or something of storage, we can simply add that flavor into our data table. Because we are assured in the previous runs that the other combinations work, we can just run that specific one, save us time, and get us straight to the point of validating the new combination. So this is how running data-driven journeys in Virtuoso works. This is how it's represented when we run it as well. Oh yeah, so just for purpose of that last run that I did, this was just a singular run, and as you can see here, we do not see that pagination because we specified a specific row, which was for 6.7 inch. Okay, so moving on to the next concept of data and Virtuoso. So I'll just take us back to our slide. We've covered the data-driven aspect of this, specifying rows, how we execute in the advanced format, because when you select a normal option to execute, it just runs it with that default first row of data. If we want to be particular, as I said, you specify which row that you're interested in. Now, there's another scenario that we thought would be quite useful to share with you guys, which is cases where, hang on, we've got our test journeys built out as we do, but we have different environments. How do we manage this with Virtuoso? How do we cater for these situations? Do we build different tests for these environments? The answer again is no, because if we have identical environments, we can utilize that same test, but instead of purely plugging into our test data table, we have the environment manager within Virtuoso that allows us to scale how we test across different platforms. So what I'm going to do is show you that process of setting up the environment, and again, talk through best practices, which is very similar to what we do in test data tables, which is making sure our variable names are identical, and obviously making it stuff that's very easy and readable to understand by anyone. So let me take us back to Virtuoso. Return to our project dashboard and over here. So on this journey here, I've again pre-designed this for the sake of time, and we're going to cover what this could look like. And I'll show you what we're trying to do here, just to give you that context and example. I'll get rid of the quotes. So this is the Source Labs demo website, and what we're trying to simulate is how things could look. If we imagine problem user is our dev environment, and this is what things look like. Maybe it's still in development. We don't have thumbnails or images attached to our product listing page. But then again, we could have a release the following day into QA, for example, where we've made these changes. And it looks kind of like this. And then maybe we want to add one of these items to cart, proceed with the rest of the journey, so on and so forth. So if these environments are identical, QA and dev, pre-prod, whatever it might be, again, we make sure our test steps are parameterized, as you can see over here. And then how do we manage this? If I show you this over here, so this is our environment. Creating environments in Virtuoso, again, is quite an easy process in similar fashion to what we do with our test data. So we say new environment, provide the environment a name, pre-prod, for example, give a description, pre-prod environment, and then say create. And then in here, we can start to add in the variables that are specific to that environment. And where this comes into play, because I can imagine some of the questions might be, hey, what's the point of this? We can as well achieve that with our test data table. We can use these in isolation, test data tables or environments. We can use a hybrid where we combine environments with test data. There's a number of ways to utilize it, all dependent on the scenario that we're trying to cover. But what makes them stand out is environments might be more useful for cases where I'm not interested in iterative testing of the flavors of what might be available on my application, things like product listings, colors, etc. I might want to drive specific username, credentials, etc., access points, tokens, what have you, through that environment to just gain access. But then I'm interested in running flavors, iterations of what might happen further down the line in that journey. And that's where that sort of separation is achieved. So for instance, over here, we've got some specific details that are unique to the developer environment. So for instance, as we saw earlier with the product listing page and the thumbnails, those were not present. And this is the value for the absence of those products on the developer side. And what we will be doing as part of the scenario to show you shortly will be, if I'm validating against my developer website, I want to make sure those thumbnail images are not present. How do we do that? And then use the same test to validate that that thumbnail or image is present on the UAT side. So if I return to our journey over here and then set this to run again, we can toggle on our live authoring and choose which particular environment we want to run. If you remember as well, we were saying we can associate tables and do a flavor of both, but for the sake of time, we'll just be showing you with the environment today. So I'm just going to select, the default one, development, apply that. Default is always set by default, so I don't need to do this that I'm doing now. But if I did want to change this, I can select pre-prod or whichever other one that I'm interested in. So now we've got that there, the default one. I'm going to run this journey. Toggle that on for us to see. And there you go. You can see what we saw when I manually did this for yourselves, that we ran the journey. We've asserted what we did, just to show you how this was achieved as well, is we've stored the details of this particular section here that has no name, not yet developed, within our side effects, and it's stored all the details of that element in there. And what we're now asserting for is for this value here, the current source, to make sure whether or not it's broken. So what we've now done is asserted that particular value that we've gotten from the application equals what we've gotten in our specific environment here in our environment manager. And as you can see, that assertion has been validated as true, and therefore why the test has passed, or step has passed successfully. An interesting concept that we also have to make this highly reusable, save you the need of having to create multiple journeys is, if you notice, we've included both assertions for the UAT environment and the developer environment as well. But the UAT environment here, as you can see, is grayed out. And that's because we've utilized something we call conditional steps. So when to run these steps, this basically tells Virtuoso that, hey, if this variable called dev backpack is defined, then run the step. If it's not defined, then ignore the step. So that's why this one here has been ignored and skipped, because it's looked at as like, okay, this is not defined. And the reason it's not defined is because we've used the developer environment to run this journey, and therefore skips this one, runs the remainder of the test, and we're successfully at this point where we're in the cart. Now, if we decided, okay, everything's happy days with developer environment, and I now want to run this against UAT, I'll just select the environment again, happy days, I'm good to run this. And then I can run this from beginning. And there you go, we can see standard user has been selected. We can see the thumbnails as expected. It skipped the one that it performs on the dev because the value there is not defined. and it's run with the one that is defined and then proceeded to the end of the journey. So yeah, this is how we can achieve a variety of data-driven journeys within Virtuoso, targeting different environments or data tables, combinations of those tables, running specific rows, and just how it makes life a whole lot easier for helping us when it comes to automating our end-to-end scenarios. Again, as we said earlier, it's not limited to what we've shown today. This is more of a surface level scratching some of the stuff that we can do, but it really gets a whole lot more interesting when we even start mixing and mashing these things together, like environments with test data table, or even starting to call in aspects of API endpoints to pull in additional data from other databases or platforms that we might be interested in that tie into our end-to-end journey. So thanks for your time. I'll hand over to Abhijit to drive things for the remainder.
Thanks a lot, Uzo, for the wonderful explanation and the walkthrough about the data-driven testing capabilities and Virtuoso. So with that, I hope the participants liked the session today and they got to learn something new. If you have any questions, feel free to drop these questions in the Q&A section. We have been answering those questions. And in case someone would like to ask these questions live in the session, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll be allowing you to speak and you can ask your questions and we'll be happy to answer them in the live session as well. So there were few questions present in the Q&A section. While we get new questions, let me repeat them for the other audiences. So there was a question, can Virtuoso automate desktop application and API application? So currently the desktop application automation capability is not present with Virtuoso, but we do have something called as API manager, where you can build the API build the API requests and test them manually from the API manager. However, you can also automate the APIs using the journeys. You can call these APIs that you have built in the API manager and execute them sequentially. And the data that you receive as part of the response can also be reused in your UI journeys. So you can build the test cases along with UI steps as well as API test steps in an end-to-end automation use cases. That was one of the questions. Additionally, I guess there were some other. Is it possible to schedule the execution of tests and send the email with results of execution? So yes, it is possible to schedule the test executions, and also there is something called as notification. So uh, all the relevant members would also be notified about the execution and its state once these executions gets completed. So we have also shared the link of the document where you can find more details about this topic. And yes, you can also configure to integrate Virtuoso with some of the DevOps tools. So you can refer the Virtuoso guide for more details. So let me wait here for a moment to get any new questions. I guess there is one more question. So in case participants would like to ask the question live, feel free to raise your hand. So there is a new question, is data masking possible for sensitive data like passwords? So yes, as we saw in the environment section, Uzo was using a few of the environment variables. In case you would have noticed, there is a toggle button for sensitive data. So you can enable the sensitive toggle that would mask your test data. Yeah, and it will hide for all the other users. There is another question, if parallel execution of multiple tests is possible. So Virtuoso supports parallel test execution as well. And there is no need of separate configuration or setup required within Virtuoso. You directly can execute multiple journeys in parallel, and the max parallel execution that Virtuoso currently supports is 100, which means you can execute 100 test cases, which are called as journeys in Virtuoso, at the same time by executing the tests or journeys in parallel using the option that you can see on the screen now. So there is another question from Deepthi, which is, I have learned you have integrated AI in Virtuoso. Can you share a little more information, please? So, Uzo, would you like to answer, or shall I proceed answering this question as well?
Either way, I'm happy. So I can share a bit and feel free to chip in as well. For the sake of today's presentation and what we covered on the walkthrough, we looked specifically at Virtuoso's AI capability when it comes to helping us generate test data for whatever test that we might be running. And that's literally by using the prompt over here or the comment section over here to ask whatever it is that we want to generate, and it does that for us. There are other areas where we can use this as well. So for instance, I'm by no means a JavaScript engineer or claim to be an expert in it, but if I had a requirement, let's say, oh, I need to be able to always generate today's date, for example, and drive that as part of my end-to-end scenario, I can click on the bot over here and just say, create a function that returns today's date, right? And then we send that through, it processes that request, and it builds that for me. So straight away, I can now copy this code or append it to an existing extension or create a completely new one, and then use this within my journey to return today's date as part of that process. We've also utilized it in places like getting an understanding of how our journeys run, or sorry, what our journeys are about. So if we think about a scenario where QA team is meant to share a list of all the stuff that they've automated to like business owners or management, likelihood is management may not have the time to drill through these journeys to understand how they run. So what we can do in that state is go into the journey and generate a summary for it. It's quick and easy with the AI because rather than you having to type this in yourself, you can simply say, hey, generate this for me. It scans through the journey that we have and builds out what it understands to be a summary based on what your checkpoint names are saying and also what the steps are performing within the journey. And once you save that, what you will now have is this, where, yeah, you can now share a list of n number of journeys with all the summaries auto-generated by the AI, and anyone can see, right, that ticks the boxes that we want for that specific aspect over there. There are other areas where we've also implemented AI. Some of them are in our beta phase testing. So for instance, execution summary with the AI, it's able to read what we've run in terms of our test run, and again, summarize this to perhaps someone in a QA lead position or management position who doesn't have the time to go through what happened with the test. But with that summary, it shows you that return to say, hey, such and such ran, and this was the outcome of that. We've also, again, baked this into our test generation process where by selecting specific areas of the application. I'm not sure if I'll be able to show this now. I can just try and see very quickly if I can do this at the moment. So by selecting a specific area of the screen, we are able to use the AI to generate test steps for the journey that we are running. So let me just see if I can very quickly do this over here. So if I said AI authoring, and so I want to select, I don't know, this here, and say, describe the scenario you want to test. Select Comet integration and add to bag, right? I don't know NLP. I don't know how Virtuoso syntax works. I've just put in plain English, select Comet integration, that product there, and add it to bag. If I now say generate, that reads the context of the area of the screen that I've selected and auto generates the step for me. So now, without even knowing the commands, it's performed an assertion, look for this, call Comet integration, click add to bag. If I now say add this to journey, it executes those steps, and we can see now UI has responded, added to bag, and that just shows how quickly AI again can just help us build out some of these test scenarios without us fully understanding how automation principle works, but just by understanding a few principles of Virtuoso and a few things about the how to express the scenarios that we want to describe or generate, it can perform those tasks for us.
Thank you, Uzo. Thanks for the wonderful explanation. So I hope the participant got the answer. So there is also another question, can Virtuoso run on different browser stacks and mobile devices? Yes, by default, Virtuoso allows you to build these journeys on various on the desktop on the web browser. But whereas you can execute these tests on various operating systems, various browsers, and various types of devices as well. As you can see on the screen, Windows, Mac OS, then iOS, and also iPhone devices. You can choose the browser that you need as well. So that is answered as well. So I guess there are no more questions, and now we can conclude the session. So thank you all for joining us today. And if we go back to the presentation, so now since this is a monthly webinar series focused to enhance the current skills amongst the testing practitioners or virtuoso practitioners. So the next session would be on extensions, how you virtuoso capabilities by writing extensions. So this would be an introductory session on the library, the library that we have, how you use the library to uh, automate certain edge cases, how you can create the or how you can call these extensions within your journey, and how you can also create new extensions, the basic ones using the AI extension generator. So the speaker for the session would be Manish, a senior solutions architect here at Virtuoso, and this one would end on 27th June.
Cool. Okay, thank you all very much for your time. We appreciate your attendance. And again, like we said, we have a host of these webinars coming up every end of every month, and we look forward to having you on the next one. Thank you very much. And we'll be sending these across to you, by the way, the recording and I believe the slide deck as well. So look out for those in your email. Again, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Take good care and enjoy the rest of your day.